what is true for faculty and what is true for staff. So what's interesting is you have this ebb and flow for students, and oftentimes your staff and faculty may be in sync, but there are some times where it's really out of sync, right? Where when students are studying for finals, maybe you don't have as much advising going on because they're not paying any attention to that, but you have a lot of tutoring going on. Or when students first come, you don't have a lot of attending to referrals because they just started, but you have a lot of making sure the schedules are getting set, right? So this idea that you have seasonality and that it's Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Cap and Gown. I'm Rachel Phillips-Buck, VP for Student Success at Pharos Resources, joined today by our president, Matt Boisvert. Hey, Matt.
Hi, Rachel. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. You are just literally coming off the road from a trip to San Antonio for the ICUT conference.
Yeah.
Weren't sure you were going to make it back, but you raced back so you could be with us today.
So good. I mean, so Independent Colleges and Universities of Texas, and it's a neat group. It's the president's annual meeting, and really for me, it's great not only to see our current clients and future clients, see some old friends, but also to hear about the issues, like from a president's perspective, the issues that are facing higher education in the state of Texas, the future of students, all of those issues just really come together at that conference. So
yeah,
great place to be. Hey, so this is amazing. I just want to say this again on ICUT. This blew me away. In 1987, 16.9% of students attending ICUT institutions, so 17%, were non-white. So in 1982, 17% were non-white. Today, it's 52%.
Wow.
That's amazing.
That is amazing.
That's pretty neat to see. And also in the state of Texas, all of the ICUT institutions combined contribute $10.5 billion to the Texas economy. So That's pretty neat to think about.
Yeah, that's
awesome. A lot of the other thing I'll say about this, since you asked, was so Adobe was there. Adobe is a big sponsor, and they were kind to print luggage tags for people who were there. And so I got one of our Pharos luggage tag, and then they're like, "Hey, if you want to make another one," so I made a personal little fly fishing one.
Cute. That's fun.
Pretty fun.
That's a nice giveaway. I like it. It's good. Yeah. I feel like maybe you are delaying a little bit because I'm going to also say it's football season. And I feel like maybe you're like trying to divert our attention away from football.
The Giants. You're right.
Good point.
Hey, guess who the Giants play next week?
You?
Yeah.
So. Yep. We've already started. I saw a post on a Giants fan board that was like, there's always next year.
As you get started.
Yeah, it's pretty sad. That's okay. Hey, I just saw something really fun. McMurray, who, we awarded the Retention Intelligence Leader House Awards last week. They, for the third year in a row, have their highest enrollment. It's 4,144 students. They are up 30% over last year, which is incredible. They are just doing such good work. And they're, located here with us. And so we get to go spend time with them occasionally, but that's exciting. It's really fun. I was thinking about, we're going to talk a lot today about kind of the rhythm of the academic year and how we can mold our work to fit in with that. And I was just thinking about what a good job they've done of paying attention to what's happening with their students and really like leaning into that. So it's pretty fun.
What I would say, what they've really figured out is how to serve the students who are there. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
that's really neat when you start doing that really well.
And we're at the point where all of those numbers are starting to come in, right? Most of you guys are like at your 10th day or 12th day or whatever it is, you're accounting for your census date. And so, Matt, that is always it's just kind of a crapshoot, isn't it? Because on one hand, you may have done a really great job on retention and persistence. And then on the other hand, we know some schools that are going to be below what they were hoping for. And I always think it's just a good benchmark measure to know, even if you come in very high, the promise you make is that those students are going to be successful. And so thinking, how do we support them through not only to come to college, but then also to be able to be successful? And that's where your campus community can support your retention efforts to really make sure that the financial health of your institution is going strong, which is, what we talk to schools about all the time.
So to separate that out a little bit, I mean, high enrollment is great. And so we're not talking about, like at McMurray, that's great. But also you have to know how you got there, and was there a change in your input of the kinds of students who came in this year compared to the year before?
Yeah.
If not a change, then your system is designed to best serve them and get the results that you maximize results. If there's a fundamental change in your student, incoming student population, like there's an increased number who don't have dual enrolled or AP credits, then that's going to be a more at-risk population.
Yeah.
More of them now.
And we got to get them and we got to keep them both, right?
Design better systems for them. Yeah.
All right. Well, do you have anything else you want to say in our preamble?
No, I think I covered it.
I would like to move on to slow productivity,
and that is the State of the Union.
And that is the State of the Union. I'm a little bit rusty. So I want to move on to slow productivity. And this is Cal Newport. Is that right? I always get his name wrong. Cal Newport. So I want to remind you guys, this is our book of the year, which is a little bit tricky because rhythm of the academic year, we don't really pay attention to years, but we started in January. We're halfway through. I'd like to remind you what we're talking about. Our book on slow productivity is really about how we think of efficiency and how we think about good work. So good work is not busy work. Good work is not always visible work. Good work is thinking upstream, thinking about the most important things. The principles of this book are do fewer things, work at a natural pace, and obsess over quality. So we talked about do fewer things, which, the things that came out of that for me that I have used since that episode in May are things like, can you just, if somebody says, can you just, and you have here's 27 steps before I can just make that transparent for them. Just say, you're asking me to address a referral. Here's all the stuff I have to do before I can actually do that, right? Or you're asking me to just come to your class and talk about this. Here's all of the stuff that I have to do. Make that really transparent. Also, Matt, we've talked about overhead tax, which is where it's there's a bunch of things that have to happen, oftentimes in legacy projects, where it's we've always done this and there's all of this stuff I have to do before we can actually deliver the project. And so articulating that and saying, it's going to take me longer than you think because I have all of this overhead tax that I have to do. His recommendations are around mission limiting. So limit your mission. You should only have 1 to 3 maximum in your life, and you should name them, and you've got to focus on them ruthlessly. So even if it's a good thing, if it does not fall in your mission, then you got to say, nope, I'm not going to do that, which I really love. Limit your projects. So distinguish between finite projects like orientation planning and ongoing responsibilities like advising. You need to understand how that falls. If this is a thing and I've done it, or it's going to be throughout the year. Create timelines, block the time you need on your calendar. Don't just leave that open for meetings, but make sure you're paying attention to that. And then lastly, limit your daily goals. You have one major initiative every day. You're scheduling days for specific work. Today is the day that I work on, retention intelligence and build in time for genuine emergencies. So we've covered all of that stuff. Today, I want us to talk about working at a natural pace. And one of the things that I love about this is it fits so beautifully with the rhythm of the academic year. And, you and I usually talk about rhythm of the academic year for students, but we have this at Pharos Resources that mirrors actually what is true for faculty and what is true for staff. So what's interesting is you have this ebb and flow for students, and oftentimes your staff and faculty may be in sync, but there are some times where it's really out of sync, right? Where when students are studying for finals, maybe you don't have as much advising going on because they're not paying any attention to that, but you have a lot of tutoring going on. Or when students first come, you don't have a lot of attending to referrals because they just started, but you have a lot of making sure the schedules are getting set, right? So this idea that you have seasonality and that it doesn't necessarily mirror what the students are experiencing, but it's for sure tied to when they're free and when they can come see you. Do you have something to say about that?
I have a lot to say about that, but I think so. I'll try to focus it. So one thing that's kind of heavy on my mind right now at the start of the year is, so when you think about getting into a different rhythm, a natural rhythm, and understanding these ebbs and flows and all that. So starting this year off and just being really thoughtful about that, and starting your day off with, so again, going to the mission, like, why am I here?
Yeah.
Right. And so there are a lot of things that start to kind of bombard our calendar that take you actually away from the why you're there. And so what I'm thinking about, I'm thinking about this dream of, if you start your day and you're like, right now, the season, what students need from me is this. And
Yeah.
that's what I'm going to hold. Everything else I'm going to hold back, because what students need from me right now is this. This is the rhythm of their season. This is what's going on. What I was contrasting that with, and what made me laugh, is we've all seen the offices that act like everything happens all the time.
Right.
And so it's just a lot of busy, and we're going to meet about this thing that's, are you kidding? That's 9 months from now, urgent. Like,
right.
What's urgent right now are these things. Why are you so blind to what's important to our students right now? And I'm not saying don't plan.
Yeah, of course.
What I'm thinking about is the guy from career services who sets up a table in the library to meet with students, but it's totally out of rhythm when students want to talk to them about interviewing or you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's the right message at the right time, for sure. Right? You have to be giving them the message when they're ready to hear it. And I do think it's a really important part, which is there is some immediacy with what students need. As in, if you miss their social connections in the first 3 weeks, they do have success debt, and it is going to be harder in 6 weeks to get them connected. If they miss the academic reassurance around midterms or their first test or whatever, it is going to be harder to help them to recover. So what Cal is saying in this idea of work at a natural pace is that the most important work is going to unfold in a sustainable timeline. And it's going to vary in intensity, which is exactly what you're saying. Like, you should be able to, if you've worked in higher education for any amount of time, I would say for 1 year, you should be able to look at your calendar and say, I know this is when I'm going to be busy with this kind of work. And then I know this is when I'm going to be busy with this kind of work. You should be able to put on your calendar. We put it on our calendar. Z and Rebecca have on their calendar, busy season starts. And it's variable. Like, sometimes it's a week before and sometimes it's a week later. But that's a way for us to say at the beginning of summer, look, we have until this time where we can do some of those summer projects. And then we are full of support requests trying to make sure that everything's working well for the beginning of the semester. So thinking about the variation of that. And I think, Matt, what I want to come back to is oftentimes we understand there's variability, but we forget to take the slow times for rejuvenation. in terms of sustainability, there are times where you can say it's advising season and I have to see this many students. But there are other times, like between finals and the end of the semester, or between Thanksgiving and the week of finals, there are some times in there where you can say, I worked like crazy in high intensity because my students needed me for this period of time. And now I'm going to find spaces in between to like recapture my sanity and think about some of those bigger projects, because you have to fit them in times where it's not urgent for you to see your students, right? Which I think is some of the pushback we would get from student success people, is like, it always feels urgent, but I don't, there are times when there is an urgent student issue. If your work is always urgent, we've got to fix that. I think that's fair to say, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put that.
Also, I think it's really interesting. I think about our team, and we have people on our team who are much more comfortable with a marathon. So they like that planning of like, what are we going to do for the next year? Okay, then here's what I'm going to do for these 2 months. And then, right, there are people who like that. And then there are other people who like the sprint. They're like, if here's what we need to accomplish, I'm going to work really hard for 3 months and I'm going to get it done. And then I've got to take this breather time in between. So you have to know kind of what you're comfortable with and figure out how to fit that into the ebb and flow of rhythm of the academic year and what your students need from you, which I think is really interesting. This book talks about work versus foraging, which I think this is fascinating. He has this whole premise, which is like, when you're foraging, you have like, you're just spending all day working, right? You're always out, you're looking for everything. What are you going to do? And then we move to be farmers, and then we have work, and we understand our work, and then we go home. So in some ways, people are like, oh, work is better because then you get your work done and you go home. And there's some sociologists actually who studied this. So one of them was his name is Lee. It was, I think, in the 1950s, maybe. He did a 15-month study of people in Botswana, and he counted how long they spent foraging for food versus how long they spent like on other chores and like leisure time. Okay. And what he found was they spent 20 hours foraging for food a week, 20 hours on other chores, and they had plenty of time for leisure. And everyone was like, that's crazy. Are you sure foragers like are just hanging around most of the time? So then they did another study years and years later in Botswana.
Just hanging around.
Sorry, that was in Botswana. And in the Philippines, where they had similar groups of people. One of them had invested in foraging, hunting, and gathering, and the other one was growing rice. So it was a little bit more like equal. They were able to kind of do this comparison. The people who were foraging and hunting and gathering spent 40 to 50% of their day in leisure, of daylight in leisure. And those that were farming spent 30% of daylight in leisure. And everyone was like, what in the world is going on? And he said, well, farming is really monotonous work. And it's wake up, do your work, go to bed, wake up, do your work. Whereas foraging is like longer in the day, but you have these breaks in between. I was thinking about fishing. I was thinking about how if you're a fisherman, it's not like you wake up and fish, and then you go home. It's like you wake up and you walk to the stream. And that is a moment where you are like collecting your thoughts and you're thinking about the day and you're getting prepared. And then you fish, and then you might take a break, and then hunting the same way, right? But this idea that there is in natural work an ebb and flow of busyness within your day, within your season, within your year, that we've really lost because we're always on our phones. We can always get a text message. We can always, and we've defined work as 8 to 5, or if you're student development, 10 to 10, right? Yeah. Where we're missing out on these intermittent pieces where we're like getting very present and resting. Anything to say to that?
Well, I actually thought you were going to start talking about Stardew Valley, so you took me there, but I was thinking about going fishing, and the truth about fishing, for me, is that I can catch my limit in 2 hours. Like when the fish are with foraging, if you know the land, or you know the stream, or you know where the animal trails are, you can be very targeted, right? And so there's some work to do there, but I think most of my fish were caught in a 2-hour window. This, my latest fly fishing trip, every day, and so that's kind of interesting to think about. The other
I
thing
think,
that I thought about is the show Alone, where people go, they gotta, survive,
yeah,
and there are no farmers on Alone.
right.
Right?
Yeah,
They don't have
that's
time for that. They don't have any time for that.
yeah, I mean, I think that's a little different because you don't
I
have your
know.
community. But I think the point of that is the intensity. What you're saying about if you're fishing or you're foraging or you're hunting, you may be out all day, but you are not doing the work all day. You have these points of high intensity where you're really paying attention, and you have points of low intensity where you're walking to the place, or you're waiting for the fish to bite, or you're waiting for the animal to walk by. And we've lost a lot of that. Technology makes it so that we don't have these varying levels of intensity. We actually can go minute to minute to minute to minute in high intensity. And it's not conducive for a healthy life, is what Cal Newport would say. We don't have downtime built into our lives.
And let's be real, we're seeing that right now with Zoom, on to the next one, on to the next one. It used to
Right,
be, for their
right,
Zoom meetings, I'd have a meeting, and then I'd have 10 minutes built in, or 30 minutes, to walk across campus,
right.
get my coffee, see students, pop into, see a friend, and then go on to my next meeting.
And in fact, Matt, it's funny. I was just talking to one of my faculty members who was saying he's a social psychologist. So he's really interested in what time do you show up for a meeting if it's in person versus if it's on Zoom. And he was like, it's really funny because on Zoom, everyone is punctual. You show up at 5 o'clock. Why? Because you just finished your other meeting and here you are.
Right.
Right? You don't want to
Right.
hang around. For an in-person meeting, if you get there 5 minutes early, other people are there and you talk and you're like, how's your family? What's happening? You just miss out on that whole low intensity, let's just hang out with each other for a minute. So it's a really good point.
And I would just come back. I don't know why this is just compelling to me, but again, that to me seems like a missional kind of fit thing to do. So when we become so transactional,
Right.
that's not mission fit.
Right.
Especially at our schools we serve, they're relational.
Yeah.
And that's the best part of a meeting is the before the meeting and after the meetings.
Right.
Being
And
able to just spend that
yeah.
time.
But let's remember that we defined our productivity as what are you producing? What are you investing in? And that is students. And so if you are like, no, I've got to do this, I've got to do this, I've got to do this, you were not showing up in the best way.
Right.
So yeah, this idea of how do you find intensity, high intensity and low intensity. And it's okay to have periods of high intensity, both seasonally and in a day. Our pitfall is when we don't then weave in low intensity throughout the day as well, right? We can't just go, because then we're going to burn out. Okay, so Cal Newport has some really practical. One of the reasons I like this book is he's just very practical. So I'm going to run through some of the practical things he says. I love a good action item.
Okay.
And I'm really curious to hear from our listeners because I think there is such a resistance to healthy living in this way. People being like, but I could never do that because my job's not conducive to that. My life's not conducive to that. And I think maybe it says something. I mean, I'll be honest, when I'm reading these things, I'm like, I could never do that. And then I'm like, why? Why couldn't I do that? That doesn't make any sense. So this idea of slowing down and having moments where you catch your breath, I think is so uncomfortable for some of us, right? We're just used to that busyness all the time. So here's what he says. First of all, he's like, hey, time scale really matters. So when you think about if you're defining your time scale as in a day, and you're like, I only have a day to get all this stuff done, and so I've got to work these 8 hours, then okay, well, if you only have 8 hours to accomplish a thing, then maybe you do have to work 8 hours. But if you think about what you need to accomplish in a week or in a month or in a year or in 5 years, then the the 8 hours that you have today, you have a little bit more give to say, I'm going to work 4 hours on this 5-year project today, but I also have 2 hours that I could spend thinking, dreaming, being present, being slow, right? The idea that depending on how you punctuate that, all of a sudden it can look really, really different. And so if you have a 5-year plan where you've said, yes, here's where I want to be in 5 years, it gives you time and space to come back to your goals continually, but also it gives you breathing room because you're not packing your 5-year plan with, you've got to work 8 hours every single day to get to the end of this 5-year plan. You're saying, I have time to both rest and rejuvenate and work hard on my goal. Does that make sense?
It does. And the thing that comes to my mind is what we've talked about with creativity. And
Right.
and so if you think about this rush, and not just creating some space, you have to create space for creativity. If you're always under the gun, you can't be creative. You're actually, so your ideas are not going to be the best.
Right.
And so, for me, when I think about the walk across campus, what that would do for me and how that would open up ideas. Like, I'm going to paint a desk purple and I'm going to wheel it out to this place, like right here. Right. I mean, that those are the kinds of ideas that you can only do creative things when you hold space for it. And so that's really important. And
for sure.
if your time scale, like it's due and it's crunch time, hopefully you've already woven in your creative time and excellence in your idea because you held some space earlier.
Yeah.
But yeah, on a long-term project, you're going to deliver a higher quality product by holding space so that you can be creative and think through, how do I plus this idea? How could I take this from good to like really remarkable, something that leaves an impression?
Yeah, it's funny when I think about writing papers in my undergraduate work, like my goal as an undergraduate was to write the paper so I could turn it in when it was due. Right. So like if I finished it 5 minutes early, I didn't do a good job time managing because I still have 5 minutes. I could have still been writing. Versus being like, if I finish it 2 days early, I can walk away from it. I can come back to it. I can think about it for those 2 days. I can read through it and then I can edit it so that it's really polished and then turn it in. And that space in there where you can just sit in quiet for a minute instead of it feeling so rushed, I think is how you polish that. Okay, he says you need to simplify your work days. You need to reduce the number of tasks in a work day. There's what you can do in a work day and what you should do in a work day, and reducing tasks is a good idea. And he also says reduce appointments, which we've already talked a lot about, like talking about the work versus doing the work. Sometimes you have to talk about the work, but a lot of times your meetings can be run much more efficiently. Have an agenda, ask people. We've already talked about it, right? So fewer appointments, like talking about the work. But I like this idea of protected hours, which we do oftentimes at Pharos, which is like Monday morning is not a good time for meetings. That is just everybody's getting reacclimated. They're trying to remember what's happening and they're setting out their agenda. So we're not going to do Monday morning meetings. We're going to do that. We're going to shift that later. And so we're not scheduling those then. Or one for you, one for me. So I have a meeting where we have to talk about a thing. So I'm going to put that in the calendar, but I'm also later in the day going to take an hour and say, this is protected time where I am going to do the things that I need to do in terms of being creative and thinking through and being proactive and thinking upstream instead of just constantly feeling like I'm responding to things. Okay, he also talks about embracing seasonality. We've just talked about this, varying the intensity and focus of your work. And he says, there's this, you remember this whole movement of quiet quitting, which I think is still going around, but I don't think it's quite as prevalent. What? Are you frozen or are you shocked? I think you're frozen. Okay. Quiet quitting. But he's like, there's a time and a place where you may have seasons in your work where you can not quietly quit, but you can pull back. If you're always saying no to projects and you're never available, people are going to be very unhappy with you because then you're not doing your job, right? But if every Thursday in the morning you are not as responsive as you are every other day, then that's okay. You can hold that space for you to be able to focus on the things that are really important. So he has things like scheduling rest days. I was thinking about Braden's always so kind to us after traveling that she puts on our calendar. We get the day off after traveling. We're not very good at taking advantage of that, but that's a good example of like, we have just spent all of this time on the road, sometimes over the weekend, and then you get to just have a day where you regroup, get yourself settled, get back together, making sure that you are creating those opportunities when the season is appropriate, right? I was thinking about one of our schools that ends in November. I love that idea so much because what happens then is between November and Christmas, you have this whole extra season of, it's sort of like summer projects, but it's a much shorter amount of time where you can really invest in getting sort of reestablished with fullness instead of running on empty. Anything you want to say about that?
Well, I just think if you're going to do that, you have to be very intentional about setting it up like that. Like, you know, how can we best use this break so that we can be better prepared for our students, but also continue to engage students during that long break.
Yeah.
There's a lot that goes into that, being intentional.
Yeah. And there's a lot of, it's interesting because I do think there are a lot of those pockets in the rhythm of the academic year that you could take advantage of. There are times when when it's dead, Friday afternoon, no one is coming to your office. You know what I mean? Students are going home for the weekend or whatever. I mean, you may have an office where they come Friday afternoons, but they're not coming in for advising help typically on a Friday afternoon. So how do you take advantage of those pockets and use them for some just varying in intensity? Okay, the last thing that I want to tell you that he says is creating rituals. And we love the art of community, which is all about how you create community and space. And it's all about space and language and symbols and all of that. One of the things that Cal says is it's really important to have a ritual where you mark the beginning of a kind of work that you're doing that puts you in the right mindset to then be immersed in that work. So he talks about writers who are like, one of the writers he talks about gets up in the morning at 5 o'clock and for an hour chops wood. And that like gets him in the right mindset. And then he goes and he writes for the rest of the morning until he's done. Or another writer who's like, I go to my favorite diner and I order a strawberry milkshake. And that is the ritual for me. That's like, starting now, you are going to start doing this really deep thinking work. So I think it would be really fun to think about what kind of ritual. It has to be very, very obvious. It can't be something like, oh yeah, when I got my coffee, but maybe a certain kind of coffee that then signifies to your brain, we are entering into a different space. We're entering into a different energy level. We're going to be really present in that. And we're going to be focused because this variation in intensity is a very healthy way for us to live. And in reality, helps us deliver better products, better service, better attention, better communities than if we're just frenetically working from one thing to the next all the time without building in some of those times to rest. So I would love to hear some of the rituals that people have to kind of set their mind on that. Any closing thoughts for us, Matt?
Oh, I just think this is really good. It's a really good. So for me, just starting this academic year and thinking about the rhythm, what we're facing. So just came back from ICUT. We've got a trip to ACA. Then it's like Indianapolis. And so there's a lot of travel that goes in, but there's a lot of important things that have to happen before or for that travel. So I'm just starting to apply that myself.
Yeah.
But in the end, thinking about it's just so important to step back and say what really matters right now. And prioritize that. So don't get lost in I told you the book that this kind of reminds me of is Gordon McKenzie's Orbiting the Giant Hairball. Don't get tangled up in the hairball of higher ed and but really all the meetings and all the stuff. Stay focused and orbit that hairball. And this is Cal has done a great job of of giving practical ways to do that and keeping yourself healthy. So
for sure.
great.
You may have to come on and say more about that, because I'm sure our listeners, if they don't know that book, are like, what are you talking about? Okay, we are going to take
higher ed. Yeah.
Yes, we are taking next week off. The week after, Suzette Parker is going to be on talking about brain health and how you can help your students sort of remain calm and overcome anxiety. So thank you guys for joining us, and find some rituals and time to vary the intensity of your work. Have a great day.